All right, it's 12 p.m., so we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to our webinar on engaging community in municipal art space projects, featuring the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre and the Toronto Centre for the Arts. My name is Alex Glass, and I am the Program and Assistant Executive Director at ArtsBuild Ontario. We are very pleased to have two guest presenters for today's webinar, Steve Solsky, who is the Executive Director of the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, and we have Christopher Dell, who is the Director of Production at TO Live, known previously as Toronto Civic Theatres. One moment as we flip slides. All right, before we get started, we just need to review a few housekeeping items. First of all, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in. You can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting. We will also be offering closed captioning throughout the webinar today. The closed captioning will be happening at the bottom of the screen, where participants can change the font type, size, and color. I'm just going to take a moment and ask a participant to confirm, using the chat box in the bottom right, that they can see the closed captioning box at the bottom of the meeting room and that it's working and transcribing. So if you could type a quick yes, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you, Terry, Chad, Wendy, Danica, Linda, and everyone. Okay. A record of the closed captioning will be sent to participants following the webinar and made available on our website. A couple more things to cover as well. We will be recording the session today, and we'll be emailing a link out of that recording for you to share and watch again as you wish. We will also be emailing out a quick survey following the webinar. We really ask that you complete the survey so we can continue to improve our learning series for creative spaces in our network. And finally, we'll have roughly 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions you might have. For the questions, we ask that you use the chat box, again at the bottom right of our screen, to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as possible. So in case you have not heard of ArtsBuild Ontario, we are a nonprofit arts service organization that provides programs and learning opportunities that help make Ontario's creative spaces more sustainable. One of our programs is the Learning Series, which is a series of webinars, workshops, and resources that support our core programs, which are Space Finder in Canada, the Creative Spaces Mentoring Network, and Asset Planner for the Arts. Many of the webinars we will be offering over the next year will focus on capital projects and accessibility in creative spaces. In this webinar, we will be exploring the topic of engaging community in municipal art space projects. As many of you know, community needs in the municipal art sector and art sector at large are always evolving. So how can municipal performing arts venues continually serve local creators, artists, and the community with creative space? In this webinar, Steve and Chris will both be sharing their experiences and recommendations for understanding and building performing arts spaces around community needs. I would like to now introduce our guest presenters for today's webinar. Steve Solsky is the Executive Director of the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, located in St. Catharines, which opened its doors in November 2015. Steve's role was to oversee the design, construction, and operation of the state-of-the-art multi-venue centre, as well as engage community artist groups to present and perform in the space. With over 30 years working in the entertainment business, Steve has built successful arts programs and venues. Prior to the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, he managed 3 performing arts venues in the city of Brampton, including the conception and design of Brampton's renowned Rose Theatre. Steve is passionate about bringing the experience of live performing back into local communities, and his experience has shown that arts and culture can be both social and economic drivers of change. Christopher Dell has been working professionally in the arts since 1994. He is the Director of Production at TO Live, which operates the Sony Centre, St. Lawrence Centre, and the Toronto Centre for the Arts. Attending York University in 1991, Christopher graduated with a BFA in theatre, specializing in production. Working as a freelance designer, technician, and production manager, Christopher has worked at theatres and festivals such as Buddies in Bad Times, the Tarragon, Factory Theatre, Leah Paulson's, and the Luminato Festival over the years. Christopher joined the Toronto Centre for the Arts as a production manager in 2002 and has immensely enjoyed working with all the different acts, artists, and organizations that have appeared upon the TCA's stages. The working through the amalgamation of the Sony Center, St. Lawrence Center, and the Toronto Center for the Arts into Civic Theatres Toronto, now TO Live, has been a tremendously rewarding challenge and opportunity, and Christopher looks forward to helping TO Live grow further. So, to get us started, I would like to now hand things over to Steve to begin his presentation. So over to you, Steve. So Steve, you just need to unmute your microphone and you can get started.
Okay. Am I on? Am I live?
You're live.
That was the challenge of the day, is trying to unmute my microphone, obviously. Because, anyway, here I am. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Community engagement, I think, is at the heart of opening any performing arts center, certainly if you want it to be successful. The First Ontario Performing Arts Center is located in downtown St. Catharines. And really, as part of engagement, location of a center is really something to be considered. In our case, I'll talk a little bit about that. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about a brief history of the center very quickly. I want to talk a little bit about the user group committee. I want to talk about the building component for the program of the venue, meaning what we were designing for each one of the spaces. I want to talk a little bit about fundraising, bringing the community together, a little bit about mission, vision, and values. Then I'll talk about challenges and the impact on the community. So from a history perspective, we started talking about building a performing arts center in St. Catharines in 1968, and in 1977, and in 89, and then in the 90s. And then finally in 2006, there was the ability to get a feasibility study for the venue. And the impetus for that really was Brock University wanting to come off the main campus and engage with the community by coming into the community and, like I say, off main campus. So it was part of their need and deliverable, which was actually driven by a financial gift by somebody from the community who wanted to see Brock off the main campus in the community. So the feasibility study was commissioned to sort of lay out for the city what exactly a performing arts center could do and what it would do. Leading from that, as a condition of getting funding, you needed a cluster master plan in the late 2000s. So the city put together a downtown creative master plan, which included bringing Brock University into the downtown. There was an old factory right in the middle of the downtown. It was a haircloth factory that was operational well into the century. And the university saw that as an opportunity to move their Marilyn I. Walker School of Fine and Performing Arts. So they came to the city and said, hey, we will move our university if you build a performing arts center. And with that partnership, the city was able to go and get funding from all three levels of government, the municipality, the province, and the feds. The city actually got this building for one third of a dollar, because the other levels of government picked up the other costs. Now, out of that came a user group committee, which was formed, which was based on people that perceive themselves as users, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Hiring an architect, obviously, to pull the venue together. Then they brought in myself in 2011 with the expectation we'd be open in 2014, and for reasons we didn't get open in 2015. But I think bringing in an executive director early in the project allows us, first of all, it certainly allows to pull a venue together that will actually function in many different ways, not just as a user group. Also to work with the community to get them ready for an art center to come into their city, and then working with the industry itself to prepare for the art center to be coming into and a place where people will want to perform. So the user group committee was responsible for the design concept. Like I say, I'll talk about that in a bit, and the venue opening in November 2015. So those were kind of the steps that we needed, and I'll touch on the specific community engagement parts of that. So developing the first Ontario Performing Arts Centre in the downtown was specifically for the revitalization of the downtown. So it was a revitalization project. It was an economic development project. That is what sold the city on bringing the Performing Arts Centre as well as the partnership with Brock. So again, the whole idea of what do we do with downtown Ontario's, and certainly in St. Catharines, they had the same challenge. And, bringing it back to its heyday, and that's the picture that I show you there, which was a long time ago, but St. Catharines actually had streetcars, and the downtown was a bustling area, a hub for the community, and certainly what they wanted to bring back by developing the Arts Centre and bringing the university into the downtown. So as part of building the Performing Arts Centre, as I suggested, we got 3 levels of government. So this was a $60 million project. 66 million of it was for the land acquisition to be able to build this. The city had to expropriate land in the downtown, a retail component, as well as the haircloth venue, which they gifted to the university for $1. So that partnership between the city and Brock University, they had a presenting series up at Brock University. For those that have been around will know of the Center for the Arts up at Brock University. It was a 40-year venue with a presenting series. So we literally absorbed that program and brought it into the new center. So an instant audience came with it, which helped obviously as part of the community development. But coming into the downtown was a challenge because the downtown was not known as a safe place. Actually, it was known as a really rough place. It was known as a place where a lot of people were challenged, a lot of drugs on the streets, a lot of things that prevented people from coming into the downtown. So part of that engagement with the community was convincing them that, first of all, this was going to change that and that they were able to come into the downtown, which was a big challenge for us, no doubt about it. So we developed a user group, and the user group was given, was an official committee of city council. So they were empowered by the city to literally research what the components of this venue should be. And there were a number of groups that participated, and I've got a list of them there. And my point about this is those groups, not every one of them made it to the opening of the venue. We started this conversation in 2010. We didn't open until 2015. So a number of these groups that were engaged in designing the venue and what was going to be the components of the venue weren't around when we actually opened the venue. So critically, an executive director had the ability, and what I would do is I would look at the venue and make sure that even though it was designed for a certain need in the community, that it had the ability to be a multifunctional space and provide access to more than just the company that was building it. So that was a bit of a challenge for the groups to make it to the opening, to hold on to the opening, because they were literally still in church basements. They were out of, they were performing in conference centers. They didn't have a professional fitted performing arts center in Niagara. So they went and toured a number of venues for a couple of years to get as much information as they could. And the committee attended numerous design sessions. So a lot of volunteer work went into this design by this group that was referred to as the user group committee. And they had many subcommittees. So that wasn't just those groups. They could invite other groups in to give their input, so that when the design was done, the final design, it had input from all of the arts community across Niagara into different components of what the venue would be. And that final design was presented to council for their final approval. Now, when council delegates authority to a group, there wasn't much debate at city council around this because they had already given that authority over to the group. they were there really to rubber stamp what the group determined. And obviously on that group were city councilors as well. There was city council representation on, city staff representation on there as well. So out of that user group committee, we designed a 9,500 square foot multi-purpose venue with 4 performing arts venues under one roof. We have our main concert hall, which is 782 seats. We have a black box multi-purpose venue of 200 fixed seats. Well, not fixed, they're retractable, but in a seating environment, that is a maximum of 200, but we can get up to 400 people standing in that room, and we have deployed that type of venue in that room as well. So it's very, very multifunctional. The next 2 venues are shared venues with Brock University. So as part of our relationship with Brock University, we built them a recital hall that they have access to Monday through Thursday exclusively, and the community has access to that venue Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Similarly with the Film House, it was designed as a professional cinema, but it functions as a lecture hall. So by day, Monday through Friday, the university is using that as a lecture facility, and then by night, it's a film house. And I'll talk a little bit about the impact of that. The next aspect of community engagement. So first of all, the first level was with Brock. You know, we got Brock as a partner to come in, the first level of community engagement. The second level was to engage the user group. And then I saw the third level of development is in the fundraising, because you're out before the venue is even built. It's a design concept at that point. And it's a real barometer of the acceptance of the community when you go out and try to fundraise. So you're either going to run into a lot of resistance and very little support, or you're going to run into what is overwhelming support, is what we found our situation. So our goal was to raise $5 million, and we went out to raise 5, and we ended up raising $7.5 million. Luckily, because the venue came over budget $1 million, so we needed an extra $1 million to pay for the venue, and we have a small surplus within our fundraising right now that we will be able to use for risk and sustainability reserves that we're working with our board on right now. So out of our fundraising, it was really an indication to us that this venue was seen as something that was needed, as something that the community was going to engage with, and there were people in the community that were prepared to put their money against that dream. So the first major part of it was naming the venue, First Ontario Performing Arts Centre. Obviously, that came with a gift. Partridge Hall came with a gift. Robertson Theatre came with a gift. Those were the first things we chunked out, major gifts. And then we went out to the community for smaller $5,000 to $10,000 gifts. And doing that in that order really allows you to get the bigger dollars first and then go after the smaller dollars afterward. But we called it the capital portion and the community portion. The community portion was very successful. What pushed us over the top is when people could start to donate $5,000 and $10,000. We found that that program was very, very successful. So a really good indicator that the community was starting to engage in this. We felt it was important, though, that the community feel part of the opening of this center. So this is a picture of our opening, and there's all the politicians on stage, and you know, there's some from last term, and there's 2 mayors up there because one mayor approved it and one mayor opened it, and there's the MPP and the MP, and you know, they're all there. But that's not what it's about. It's about the community. So we really wanted to open this and share that experience with the community. So if you look into the crowd there, you can kind of see that people have scissors in their hands, and we've got ribbons kind of across the seats. So we put a ribbon across every row in the auditorium and gave everybody scissors. Yes, our front house people weren't happy, but they were safety scissors, and we had things that made sure people couldn't stab themselves with them. So that was a bit of a challenge, getting people to understand that we were going to give everybody a pair of scissors, but we did that. And that everybody in the auditorium shared in the cutting of that ribbon. So it was a full house. We all cut the ribbon, and then people were able to take a piece of that ribbon home with them. We really wanted it to be more than just the politicians up on stage, getting their moment in the sun. We really wanted the community to feel part of the opening. So we saw that as the fourth level of engagement, getting the community involved, getting the community excited about having this venue. And then for us, the final level was what the venue said. What did we say to the community in our mission and in our values? So we set a goal as a staff group to be the best performing arts center of its kind in Canada. And what does that mean? It means a lot of things, and it might mean something different to me than it means to some of you out there. But we wanted to set this goal not only for ourselves, but for the community, because the community didn't really see themselves or see the value necessarily as we were building this. They see the value now. But we really wanted to come out and say, you know what, we're going to be the best at this. So not only are we building a performing arts center for you, it is going to be the best. So making a statement to the community on what they could expect from the venue to deliver for them. And then we really wanted to use engaging language in our vision statement. And the performing arts mission is to engage people in exceptional performing arts experience, to enrich their lives as the citizens in the Niagara region, and to provide a world-class venue for local artists and arts organizations. We really wanted the community to seed themselves. And what are we going to do? We're going to provide leadership to develop the audiences to help you. We're going to provide exceptional service to our clients groups who use the facility, so that they know when they come in here, we're here to help and serve them. We're going to increase accessibility and enjoyment of the performing arts. We're going to stimulate understanding and the curiosity of the performing arts. And we're going to establish partnerships that increase the potential and the value. And our vision is a community that values and participates in the performing arts. Again, about the community, about engagement, about involvement, for them to see themselves in this venue. Going very fast, as I see by the clock. So our values, and I'll talk a little bit more about the challenges, so I'll spend a little bit more time. But our values, these values that we want to demonstrate to everybody that's going to use this, including our funders and our donors and our artists and our patrons and our clients. And we want to inspire, we want to welcome and engage. We want to set an example. We want to we want to strive to improve and find better ways of doing things. And we want to be true to our word and be transparent and honest as we, try to act fairly through some of the challenges that we have. So let me talk a little bit about that. Slide here, sorry. Again, our purpose, and again, using engaging language, engaging people in exceptional experiences. We wanted to be in the heart of Niagara, so we're regionally. We wanted to show that we were a collaborator, and that we were here to host and again inspire and engage a diverse audience. And really, the next statement about us being driven by our collective creativity. I felt that this was important because people built this $60 million building. The building is doing this, the building is doing that. And it's not the building that's doing anything. It's the people that are doing it. And it's the people that work here. It's the people that are coming. It's the community. So it's about the people. It's not about the building. And a lot of people just feel that our success is based on the fact that we dropped a world-class performing arts center in the middle of this community, but it is far from that. So challenges, these are real because the user group committee, and it was difficult because everybody has personal agendas as they go forward. And frankly, that can be the worst thing that can happen to a community. If the arts community doesn't speak with one voice, or they start letting personal agendas interfere with the end goal, which is to have a performing arts center. So the user group committee was kind of, I wouldn't say forced, but they were brought together to have a conversation to understand and learn about what each other's needs were, as well as being able to get out what their needs specifically around the venue was. It was contentious at times because you had big organizations like the symphony orchestra that professionally led and full of fundraising and staff, and then you had smaller producing theater companies with 2 people that did everything. They were artistic director, they were administrative director, they were fundraising, they did it all. So this real diversity of groups that came together. But the understanding that they had, it was well led by cultural department of the city. So how they managed that, I thought, was a really important component of getting this venue opened, because the arts did come together and finally speak with one voice. But I find those are challenges now, even as we go forward, that we still see personal agendas wanting to take the precedence. But in a lot of cases, in an arts center that's here for the whole community, personal agendas are something that really can divert you from that and get away from the idea that these centers are for everyone and everybody to be able to use and to actually participate or see a show. The other thing is, getting them to understand that a new center will cost money. It sounds good on paper when you talk to these people, and that was part of my role, was to meet with every one of these groups and start looking at their budgets, because they were given a key. They were given a key to where they were using. They got 24/7 access to this thing. They could do whatever they want. They could show up at 8 in the morning. They could leave at 3 in the morning. They could work right in the space. They didn't have to worry about any safety equipment, or they just did what they did. So coming into a professionally led center, which I'll talk a little bit of the next bullet, but it comes associated with a cost. And those costs are scary when you have no understanding, or your understanding of the future is based on your present situation. A lot of them lived in their present situation. How can I afford this place? We only sell 110 tickets over our 7-day run. That's all we're going to sell in the new Performing Arts Center. Now, I had the experience of opening a few other venues, and I knew that in both of those cases, the audience for all these groups would increase by 30%. Just opening a new center, the audiences would grow by 30%. So me telling them that didn't help them understand that. And the other thing is, when you're going to a church basement and you're paying $15, that's your expectation. But you don't come to a professional performing arts center and expect to pay $15. You'll pay $25. You'll pay $35. You'll pay $55, because you're at a professional venue that has all those amenities that go with it. So these were the things that I had to get the groups to understand. And even to the day they moved in here, they didn't believe that this would happen. So the center had to absorb the majority of the risk in the first year. We did a lot of back end deals, with our renters, saying, what do you need to cover your nut? This was a full disclosure from all of us. What is your budget? What are you getting in fundraising? What did your 110 tickets equal? Let's put that into a budget. And now, what is the delta between using this place? I'll pay you that. Here's the money. So you are now whole. You have zero risk. And when we split ticket prices, you're going to get X amount of dollars. And then I'm going to take my money that I should have got, plus the money that I gave you. And then we'll split after that. And through the first year, because of my understanding of growth and ticket prices, I was able to get my money out of every single one of those renters, and they were able to split something beyond everybody getting paid. So it became a really positive experience that they could see their business model and business case changing, because they could charge more. They were getting more people coming in. And a lot of people were going from a 70-seat venue up to a 700 seat. Actually, I'm getting some feedback now.
This is Alex from AVO. Just letting you know that you have about 3 more minutes before we have to switch over to Chris.
Perfect. I'll wrap it up. So a world-class professional run arts center comes with a lot of rules, as I started to indicate. So there's a huge learning curve on their part, but what it allowed them to do, they couldn't come in, they didn't have a 24/7, they couldn't do whatever they wanted, they couldn't build sets, they couldn't disregard all safety components. They had to work within our rules, our regulations, our safety procedure, our rates and fee structure, our staff costs. We're an IA house. For those of you who don't know, IATSE, IA house, comes with some challenges on how you service some of these community groups. We have a really great deal with IA that allows access for some of these groups. So that's another component I really can't go into, but the union agreed with access and gave us a fairly good deal with dealing with these groups. So that led to them being a far better prepared organization, much more efficient in their operation, and certainly better off now that they're in a professional venue. But that was a challenge getting them to understand that you're going to come in, there's going to be a lot of rules. So I'll just quickly go over the impacts that we have, which have been quite amazing. I just put the slide on the right side, the verbiage there is all the investment into infrastructure. So if we add all that up, it's about $250 million worth of infrastructure money that was dropped right into the very block that we're operating in. So you would expect that type of infrastructure is going to have an impact, and it did. It was immediate. The impact of what the Arts Center meant to this community. We do over 600 performing arts events annually with over 500 screenings. We're at 1,100 events right now. We do 125 performing arts visitors annually, plus another 20,000 film house visitors. So almost 150,000 visitors are coming in. Brock University, 250 students are using us by day. So the access of this venue is really all day, all night. We did a little survey or a little summary for our board, and we are operating 57 hours a day right now is what we're at with our 4 venues, and you can understand how that would work out. So very busy. Our mandate was to be open every day. We were open 356 days last year. And the reason why our mandate is to be open every day is because it's downtown revitalization. It's pulling people into the downtown. It's having thousands of people into the downtown every night, changing the feeling and the vibe of the downtown. And we have an amazing volunteer program, which again is another indicator to me that the community is supportive, that the community is engaged when you have that type of dedicated volunteer force. And on that point, I will conclude. And I put this slide because, hey, maybe it's cold outside. Can I say that? Maybe not. But the arts live here in St. Catharines, and it is cold outside. Thank you.
It is cold outside, Steve. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we're going to switch gears over to Christopher Dell, who's going to present on his Toronto Centre for the Arts project. So over to you, Chris. I'll get you set up on the slide, and away you go.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to comment on a couple of things that Steve said that I think are really important in case I forget to comment on them later. One of the things that Steve mentioned that really should be underlined is bringing in key people early. And Steve referred to himself as the executive director, but my experience in going through a slightly different process, in my case, it was a renovation process, but that was one of the things that I wouldn't say we did that wrong at all, because we did have key people there along the way from start to finish. But it really became clear how valuable that was, that we had key people involved with the project early. So that is something, even if it seems like an unnecessary expense at first, bringing in key people that are going to be there when the project is done, bringing them in early so they understand why decisions were made and can influence how decisions are made is critical to the success of the project afterwards. And the other thing that Steve mentioned that I think really bears repeating is that not everyone makes it to the opening of the venue or completion of the project. And it's important to understand that. And I mentioned that because it underlines my first point, which is bringing key people in early. You need a layer of continuity or a level of continuity. And that's what bringing in those key people affords you, because people retire, people move on to other career opportunities, and that needs to be. Steve mentioned that one of the mayors was no longer mayor, so that needs to be understood, that is going to happen in any process. So building in a certain level of institutional memory is essential for the success of the project going forward. So I just wanted to mention those things. So so I work for TO Live, formerly Civic Theatres Toronto, which operates the Toronto Centre for the Arts. That amalgamation happened in 2016, and that is another example of so not everyone makes it to the opening. Certainly new parties can be involved before the opening, as you'll see as we go through a little bit of the timeline of this process that we went through. So the Toronto Centre for the Arts was built in 1993. In the former city of North York. It was a vision of the council and mayor of North York at the time to have an art center in the heart of North York, which is essentially Yonge and Sheppard. So the original feasibility study that was commissioned in terms of putting in a performance venue called for a 1,000 seat auditorium. Live entertainment were brought in as to manage the facility, and instantly the scope changed. Live-Ent, of course, was having great success with Phantom of the Opera at the time, and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and they had big plans, big aspirations, and they needed a Broadway house. So the plans for a 1,000 seat venue became plans for a 1,000 seat venue, an 1,800 seat venue, and a smaller community space of about 180 seats. And so you could see that the complex itself, of now containing 3 theaters, got considerably larger and the scope considerably broader. So Live-Ent was managing the facility. It opened in '93, as I mentioned earlier. They brought in shows like Showboat, Sunset, Ragtime, Fosse. These were all in the main auditorium, the main stage, as we call it, which is an 1,800 seat theater. But they also programmed a concert season in the 1,000 seat room, which was now a dedicated recital hall. And the image you're seeing in the background is of the recital hall itself. So they were programming that space as well, and so operating it as if it was a commercial theater. We also said, as I mentioned earlier, the 189 seat studio theater for community groups. It was a black box style of room, also with retractable seating. You can see the image in the background. And that was what the 3 theaters were in the building. And the only space that was really available to anyone was the studio theater. You could occasionally squeeze yourself into the recital hall. You could never get access to the main stage. However, in 1998, Live-Ent ceased operations, and the main stage was suddenly available. And when I say ceased operations, they stopped programming a concert season. They stopped doing any shows in the main stage. And we were forced, or rather, when I say we, so by this point, we're talking about the amalgamated city of Toronto. There's an example of people changing along the way. Formed a governing board, and in Toronto, it's what's called an ABC, so it's an agency, board, or commission. In our case, we function very similar to how the Toronto Zoo functions, which is that it's an arm's length organization with city council representation on our board, but the bulk of the board is made up of citizen members. So they became the powers that be. They put in place a management structure to operate the facility. And instead of doing risk programming or operating like a commercial venture, We were now strictly a rentals facility or a roadhouse, operating in many years on a shoestring budget as we tried to get our footing. So we had about 100 days of booking per year in the main stage in particular, but that was generally true also in the recital hall. The studio, which had always been open to the community and was considered a community access space, was a little bit stronger. So it had about 130 days of booking in this time, but it was building very quickly a user group, a user base of community and not-for-profit theaters that were using the studio space and taking advantage of it. In 2008, a bit of a white knight came in to use the main stage, and that was Capp Productions, which some of you may recall. Their biggest show was Jersey Boys, which ran flat out for 2 years, from 2008 to 2010. That's 8 shows a week, 52 weeks a year in the main stage, and they were selling out the room. All good things come to an end, and ultimately, when the ticket sales started to dip, they decided to close that show while it was still profitable, and they brought in other shows like My Fair Lady, In the Heights, $1 Million Quartet, American Idiot, which is the Green Day musical, for those of you not familiar with it. And we had an excellent relationship with them for about 5 years, so from 2008 to 2012. Now, this allowed us to do a couple of things. It allowed us to not worry about booking the main stage and focus our energies and our capacity. And when I say capacity, I mean staffing resources to filling the other 2 rooms. The recital hall, we did some equipment investment and made it a multifunctional space, which was something that Steve mentioned earlier about building rooms that were intentionally multifunctional spaces. We kind of had to retrofit the recital hall a little bit to make it a multifunctional space, make it more flexible. But we were able to actively pursue users for the recital hall and the studio theater during that time, knowing that the big room, the 1,800 seat theater, had essentially, from our perspective, full occupancy, whether or not Capp was putting a show in there or they were in between shows. They had booked the space for this 5-year period. But all good things come to an end, and eventually Capp also decided to suspend operations under different circumstances than live entertainment, but they decided to suspend operations. Every once in a while, I hear rumors that they may, in fact, bring a show in to town. So we'll see if they are in fact finished as a presenter in the business. My suspicion is not, but that's purely speculation on my part. But we were suddenly left with an empty room. Now, having a single user in a room for 5 years means that all your other old users are gone. They've all moved on. And so we were literally starting from scratch again. And in many senses, it was 1999 all over again for us. And we had to find users for that room. And that was the new challenge. So we approached large companies to book the space. We approached medium-sized companies to book the space, keeping in mind that this is an 1,800-seat theater that we're talking about. We approached small companies to book this space. What we were really looking for was a couple of anchor tenants that we could build a relationship with that would book large blocks of time, and that we could then do rentals in and around, do the one-offs in and around. At the end of the day, we talked to over 100 for-profit and not-for-profit presenters and promoters about who would like to come in and use the main stage space. And the answer was, well, we could use you for 1 or 2 days, or maybe we could use you for 2 weeks. And we couldn't find anybody that was willing to take a substantial portion of time. And by that, I'm talking about 4 weeks, 8 weeks, those types of block bookings with shows. So we were looking at one-off bookings, single-day rentals, and much uncertainty. I want to give you a little bit of background in terms of what was happening. I'm not going to say politically because that's not an accurate statement, but I will say socially. And some of you may have seen articles over, the entire period of the 2000s talking about how there's nothing happening at the Toronto Centre for the Arts. I know that was certainly a favorite line from a number of columnists in some of the newspapers. And to say that there's, nothing happening when we're doing 100 days in a room is not, is a little bit disingenuous, perhaps. But certainly there was a perception both in the media and subsequently from our principal stakeholder, the City of Toronto, who owned the building, that we were underutilized. And I would not argue with that statement, that the main stage was underutilized at 100 days a year. However, in the studio, we had found ourselves, we were up to 285 days of use, which is actually, speaking as a director of production, that's actually too much usage, which is kind of the right problem to have. But what we were having is that we found that we were turning people away because there are a certain number, as most of you know, certain number of prime dates to present shows and events: Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, in the evenings. That's when most shows happen. And all the good real estate, so to speak, in terms of dates that were available, they were all booked up. It was all taken. And so we were, in fact, some of the user groups that we had in the studio were looking to use more days in the studio, but couldn't get them because other user groups in the studio already had those dates, and they were stepping on each other's toes. And we were actually in danger of losing some of our clients in the studio because of a lack of availability. So I mentioned earlier that we had talked to over 100 different user groups in what I'll call a market survey. And the feedback that came to us consistently was, what we really need is like a 300-seat auditorium or a 500-seat auditorium or a 700-seat auditorium. So that was anecdotal response to, could you use an 1,800-seat auditorium? So we turned around again and we were like, well, we're already overbooked in the studio, which is I'll round it up and I'll call it the 200-seat room. The recital hall was now operating at about 160 days a year, so just over 50% capacity when you factor in holidays and things like that. And so we went out to the marketplace again with those user groups and we said, so how many days would you actually use a 300-seat venue or a 500-seat venue, a 700-seat venue? And what came back to us was that there was a potential demand of 400 days of booking per year. So those are the search. So now we had a real survey. We actually hired a consulting firm to go out and do that survey so that it was at an arm's length and we could present that as empirical data, that there was demand for spaces of that size by talking to not-for-profit arts and community groups. We had a room in our own building, the studio, that was bursting at the seams, in our opinion. And then Pim Skotanis, who was the general manager of the Toronto Centre at the time, he's since moved on to a different job. He found an old survey or feasibility study that had been commissioned by the board when live entertainment, went back in 1998, had ceased operations. One of the first things that the new board that I had referred to earlier did was commission a feasibility study about what could be done with this 1,800-seat venue. And it had all kinds of options. There was an option there to turn it into an aquarium. There was an option there to build it as a condo and use the other rooms around it as kind of podium space, podium retail space. They would still be theaters, but that's essentially the function that they would serve. There was a suggestion to turn it into a casino. There was a suggestion to turn it into a dinner theater and use part of the facilities to make a restaurant, a proper restaurant. But one of the things that was in this feasibility study was that the main stage could in fact be divided into two smaller theaters, and that those theaters would be approximately 600 and 300 seats in size based on this feasibility study. Bing, the light bulb went off, and it looked like we were having what I'll call a crisis of opportunity. And so the Renovation Project was born. That was brought, so these circumstances and facts were brought forward to our board. The board approved a second level of feasibility study, and an architect was commissioned as a consultant to say, okay, if we were actually going to do this to this room, what would we do? How would we do that? We spoke with the city, specifically economic development and culture and finance at this point, and said, here's something that we're thinking about doing. Is there interest from the city in partnering with us in this project? The city was very supportive because they understood that the circumstances we were in terms of the studio theater and our community and not-for-profits arts groups needing more space. We had empirical data from our market survey that corroborated that. And as I said, there was a perception of underutilization in the main space, and people were very keen to avoid going through that cycle of what I had called the empty years again. So what the architect brought in as a consultant, and then he put together a feasibility study with a proposal. We then brought in a cost consultant, and so that's a company or an agency. In our case, we used Turner Townsend, and they took a look at the materials that the architect had prepared, and they did a cost study to say how much would that cost, and so that we had attached a price tag to that. And that was brought forward as a plan to City Council, who again own the building. So we needed to get approval from the city to make substantive changes to the building, and which was approved, and we were off and running. We used a city tendering process to select an architect in an open bid format, and the winning firm was Diamond & Schmidt. And then we went into a design development phase, and which really, so the first thing that happened with the design development phase is there was a committee of our board that was formed specifically for this project, and senior staff at the Toronto Centre. They were brought together to work with the architect and talk about what this room might be like, what the uses could be. So there was a consultative process there. That let the Diamond & Schmidt work up some general concepts based on, or refine some of their general concepts, I should say. And then we went and brought in more consultants, specifically an acoustic engineer, theatrical consultants. We use Theater Consultants Collaborative, and they have an expertise in a broad range of area: electrical, rigging, any number of items, and engineering harmonics, who are not they're more for performance, sound, and video, as opposed to being acousticians. So they were all brought in, and they all had their input. Then we took this plan. We had a ground plan, we had sketches, and we went back to our stakeholders. And when I talk about our stakeholders, I'm talking about the people who were using our building already, specifically people coming out of the studio, so community and not-for-profit arts organizations, because they were the ones who were most in need of relief and a new space. Some of them were ready to grow into a larger space. We talked with a couple of other people that had been using the main stage and subsequently the recital hall. And these are groups that had been longtime users and clients and partners of ours. They weren't necessarily getting the sales to fill a 1,000 seat room. So they were brought in as people to consult with, well, if we make this new space and it can do this for you, what do you think about that? So we did stakeholder consultation. Then we went back and the architects refined the concepts even more. And then we did another stakeholder consultation. The architects went back and refined the concepts even more. All the while, of course, the committee of the board and senior management had lots of free and open dialogue with the architects. And there was a final round of stakeholder consultation because we did have a timeline that we were aiming to hit, and there was some pressure to get this project underway and started as quickly as possible. So you can see multiple rounds of consultation with stakeholders. And when I say that, I'm specifically referencing the community and present users of the room. And a design was finalized. So a constructor was contracted, again, through an open bid process. And that constructor went out and put out tenders and proposals, and we opened those bids and proposals and had a revised working budget. And I want to pause right here because one of the things that we built into our budget that everybody needs to build into a budget in this thing is a contingency fund. And one of the things that it's tempting, you see so a contingency fund should be anywhere from 10 to 20% of your budget, 10 to 20% of your budget. So in a $10 million project like this, we're talking about, we had a $1.5 million contingency fund. You see, we split the difference there is about 15%. But that contingency fund is not for buying stuff. It's actually for when surprises happen. And it was one of the things that I cannot emphasize enough is needed. Because you will have surprises. There will be things that, despite all your planning, you'll find out that, there's already something buried in the ground here that we thought was 20 feet farther south. We're going to have to move that, or we're going to have to go around that. Lots of good and wonderful surprises like that. And that's what your contingency fund is for. If you're lucky enough to have money left over at the end, go ahead and spend it. But be very strong in your discipline of not touching your contingency fund except for, oh my God, we need extra money. Where are we going to find it? So what you're seeing in the background here, this is the Stage Tower Theater. We approached one of our clients from the Studio Theater, and they became the principal resident of the Stage Tower. And we were lucky enough to secure naming rights with that. So the Stage Tower Theater is now the Greenwind Theater. Greenwind is a construction company, and they have they're a naming right sponsor. But you can see here that you can see the volume of height that's still above in the room. So we are actually looking at a photo of a theater that is sitting on the old stage of the main stage. And this room seats 299 people. The Lyric Theater, and here we see a photo of the Lyric Theater, and so it was a little bit of a different process. It was a design build process, and the reason for that is these panels, these white, bright, geometric panels that you see, had something like this. So they're programmable. They work. So the lighting board operator, the lighting designer, can actually change the color or intensity of these panels, which ones are on and which ones are off. A concept on this scale and size had not actually been done in North America before. So it was a design build process. We contracted a special firm just to come in and do that work. So that is another way to go through. So we were not working off of a set of blueprints prior to building it. We were working off of a concept, and as the work progressed, the design was refined. So you could see that. Here's a view from the stage of the same room of the Lyric Theatre, and it gives you a sample of what the walls can do and how they can be incorporated. The room was completed in the first show. So we did the ultimate construction in 2 phases. The Greenwin or Stage Tower Theatre was completed in 2015 and was doing shows in 2015. The Lyric took a bit longer. We didn't start doing shows until the fall of 2016. It was designed as a 2-stage process. We did a very soft opening, and the room is open and active today. Both rooms are. One of the things that changed, as I mentioned, was the creation of Civic Theatres Toronto, which is the amalgamation of the Sony Centre, the St. Lawrence Centre, and the Toronto Centre for the Arts. So there was a different management structure put in place. One of the repercussions of that was that the money that had been set aside to market these new rooms and promote them, it was decided that as we were going through all these changes with Civic Theatres Toronto, that we were going to delay the marketing and opening of these rooms in terms of the marketing of the opening of these rooms. And so that was a change that happened there. So it's only now that Civic Theatres, which is now called TO Live, has officially rebranded itself, that you're really going to start to see the rollout for these rooms. And so we're into early 2019 now, but these are, it's a process as far as that goes. The rooms have not been unsuccessful, and there's my little thank you slide. The rooms have not been unsuccessful in the sense that they, in 2018, and this is absent a marketing strategy, have a combined use of about 235 days. So any way you cut that, they're both being used more than 100 days, which is what the main stage was operating at. And we've in fact increased accessibility for communities and not-for-profit arts groups. And I'm really looking forward to what TO Live can do in terms of bringing these rooms even more into the community for usage. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's great. We do have a few minutes left for questions. So I'd like to invite anybody, if you do have one for Steve or for Chris, please type it in the chat box below. We'll spend a few more minutes. I'm conscious of time, but we do have a few minutes to answer some over the next little bit. So yeah, if you have any, just feel free to type them in. Great. Wendy is asking, I'm wondering from Steve and or Chris, are your naming rights term limited? Chris, why don't you answer first, and then Steve, you can answer after.
Sure. Yes, the naming rights are term limited. So for the Greenwin Theatre, that's a 10-year term, and I'm happy to share with the group that TO Live has entered into a naming rights agreement for the Toronto Centre for the Arts itself, and as of September of this year, it will be called the Meridian Arts Centre. We've entered into a deal with the credit union Meridian, and the Sony Centre will be called the Meridian Hall. So we've got the Meridian Arts Centre uptown and Meridian Hall downtown. And I think I said 10-year agreement a minute ago, but that's actually a 15-minute agreement, a 15-year agreement. Sorry.
You had us giggling a little bit back here. Steve, are you able to answer this as well?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So yes and no. The first thing is that the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre is a termed agreement, and that is over 20 years. Although the payment structure we had with them was over 3, it was an interesting conversation with the the credit union, I said, if I'm going to give you a 20-year deal, I have to go out and borrow money so that I can build the building now and then take your money in over 20 years. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. We're a credit union. Why don't we just give you the money in a shorter time period? So I got the money in 3, but we've given the naming rights over 20. Now, so that's a company. Every company that we've dealt with has a term. When we're dealing with philanthropy, we took it in a different direction. So Partridge Hall is in perpetuity. It's a philanthropy gift by a local family. And the thought behind that is that in 25 years, when we go to refit Partridge Hall, we believe that family will probably still have the wherewithal to help us. So we feel that in those cases, the best thing is in perpetuity to sort of leave it with the family to want to continue that relationship. Now, it's really for the life of an asset, which is about 35 years. Although we say in perpetuity, it really becomes to the life of the asset. And that's what we've determined the life of the asset to 35 years. So it's a bit complicated in that regard, but in our case, businesses are termed and philanthropy is given in perpetuity because we feel it gives us the best chance to fundraise when we have to with those families again as our first refusal, so to speak. So another question up here too. Do you want me to just go on?
Yes, I'm just going to read it out for everybody, if that's all.
Who funded the feasibility study? The city of St. Catharines funded the feasibility study. It cost $280,000 that they spent up front. And I'll tell you, it was one of the documents that attracted me to the job because it laid out so well for the community what they were getting, what to expect, and how much the thing was going to cost from now until the end of time. So it never any point did it talk about your breaking even. It always talked about a city-supported organization. And that's what we built. And it gives me sort of a bit of when council says, when are you going to break even, Steve? I go, well, when you redo the feasibility study and it says we're going to break even, and then you build me the building that feasibility study says to break even. Don't do a feasibility study that says it's going to cost, and then build that it's going to cost, and then come back afterwards and go, oh, by the way, when are you going to break even? It doesn't work that way. So it was funded by the city. Shortly to answer that.
Thanks, Steve. The next question we got from Brendan, which is both for Steve and Chris. You both talked about building a user group of supporters. He's asking who led that group? Was it the city, community, or users? Steve, why don't you go first, and then we'll go with.
Okay, since I'm unmuted, basically the user group was led by the cultural department, and the cultural department wrote a report to city council for the user group, got them the authority, and then they were in charge of setting agendas, minutes, all of that stuff. So there was the cultural department of the town, city, that took on the role and responsibility of managing the user group and their outcomes.
Great, thank you. And Chris?
So in our case, it was actually Pim Shkotanis, who was the general manager of the TCA at the time. We had advisors from the city participating in that. So we had people from economic development and from properties and real estate, who I should mention their advice and expertise was invaluable. But it was Pim who assembled the community support and user groups. He really took the lead in that.
Thank you. The next question is from Celia. Steve, could you talk a little bit more about the box office split model with the groups and what kind of impact in the programming has the organization seen because of this model?
Well, the way it worked was I needed to have an honest discussion with each one of the groups that was using this place. And we had to expose our budgets. I had to see everything that they had. Like, what are you bringing in from a revenue perspective? What do you expect, even from a ticket revenue perspective? And so what we did was we said, all right, and it wasn't a large input for us because these groups we were using didn't have huge production values at the time anyway. So what I did was, we're a presenting organization. I took money out of my presenting budget and gave it to them as a presenting co-pro. So that's how I structured it. So not so much as a rental deal, but sort of as a co-pro deal. And the expectation was that we're going to look at your budget. We're going to see all of the revenues that you expect and feel comfortable with. We're going to add up the expenses of using the venue and what is the difference. I'm going to pay that to you. And then at the end of the day, we look at, okay, what was that total that you needed in all of your revenue? So you needed, I'm just going to use an example, you needed $5,000 out of ticket revenue to make your budget whole. Okay, you get the first $5,000 out of ticket revenue. Now I've given you $3,500 out of my presenting budget. I want to recover that with the next $3,500. Now, if you rented my venue, it would have cost you $7,000. I want to recover that $7,000 next. And then if there's anything left, now you're whole, I'm whole, we're both whole. Now, if there's anything left, we're going to split it based on what our investment was. So again, as an example, I invest 10, you invest 20, you're going to get 2/3 of the split because you've put in more risk than I have. So that's kind of how we looked at the split after we were made both whole. So in all of those examples, I got my rental money, I got my presenting money back, and we got into a small split of what was left over. I hope that answered the question. If not, maybe you can add on. Oh, it looks like
I think that was great. Not seeing any more typing. Celia is typing. Chris, in the meantime, he says, Celia says yes, thank you. Chris, do you have anything to add to that question at all?
Other than that, I think that's a brilliant idea.
That's a brilliant idea.
No, that's very. No. That's very. So.
Great. Okay. Melissa says she also thinks that it's very innovative. So, okay, I think that wraps up the questions for this part of the webinar. I did want to bring everyone's attention to two tools we have at ArtsBuild Ontario. The first one being Plan It, Build It. It's a free online guide to planning and completing capital projects. It really looks at the 4 stages of a capital project, or 4 types of capital projects, which is a new build, major renovation, or a small to medium renovation, and ongoing operations. So we encourage you to take a look at it, and it's basically like a checklist of all the steps you need to take approaching this as an arts organization for any creative space project. So it's, again, free to access for anybody, and it's available on our website at artsbuildontario.ca. The next tool is Space Finder in Canada. So we've got Space Finder in 8 Ontario communities and 3 provincial communities. If you have a creative space in any one of these, in Toronto, Hamilton, Waterloo Region, York Region, Simcoe County, Ottawa, Sudbury, Mississauga, BC, Alberta, or Manitoba, we encourage you to list your space. Again, this is free to use as well, both for venues to list their rentals and for artists to look up space that might be available in their communities. The next webinar we are hosting is a Design for Public Spaces 101, Where Do Creative Spaces Start? This is happening on Tuesday, February the 12th at 12 p.m. This webinar will be hosted by Thea Curdy, who's the Vice President of Designable Environments, and our presenter will be Jay Pitter, who is an award-winning author and placemaker and is doing a presentation at UN Women in New York City this week. So we're very excited to have her, and you can register on our website. One last throw in for our survey. Please, we'll be emailing it to you later today. Please take 5 minutes to fill it out. We really want to hear your thoughts on our programming so we can continue to serve your needs. And then lastly, thank you to Steve and Chris for your fantastic presentations. They were really valuable for our network, and we appreciate the time you took to put those together and share it with us. And ArtsBuild Ontario recognizes the support of our funders from the Department of Canadian Heritage and Canada Council for the Arts, who supported the development of this webinar and our learning series as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We hope to see you back again at our next webinars coming up. And other than that, stay warm, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.